Welcome to Cassette Connection, the podcast where we discuss music and meaning with the people who make it. My name is Ben, and with me is Alex.
In this episode, we talk to bassist and composer Brendan Keller-Tuberg. Brendan is a jazz composer and bass player who has studied in Australia and the US. We caught up with him having recently returned to Canberra.
We talk with Brendan about his time studying the bass in the US. We discuss his experience playing in a band, being a composer, and also being a leader of an ensemble. Brendan also tells us about his musical influences and his thoughts on broad listening. We discuss his ideas and thoughts about where jazz is at today and what the future of the style might hold. Just a bit of a warning, there is a small amount of internet noise in this interview, but hopefully that doesn't distract from the insight Brendan is giving us.
Here's how it went down.
Hi, my name is Brendan Keller-Tuberg. I'm a bassist and composer. I guess you could say I play jazz of sorts. I've certainly studied it as my primary thing that I do. But I guess, generally attribute my compositions more to just improvised music more generally. The long overview is I have spent a lot of time, or I first started getting into music through classical piano lessons. But then eventually when I realized if I picked up bass, I could play with other people, that became a much more attractive idea. And I also started getting into jazz more because I found it to be a much closer link to all of the popular, or I guess the more contemporary music and rock music and electronic and hip hop and all the other things that I was listening to. I felt like I could allow those to influence my musicianship in a much more meaningful way. So I got more into jazz because of that. So I did my undergrad at ANU, which is where, of course, I met Ben Harb as part of the experimental music studio. Was that what it was called? I guess so. Yeah. We did a lot of contemporary improvisation and graphic notation, all this kind of stuff. And at the same time, I was in the shed, just learning how to play 2-5-1 licks in jazz. So I recently got back from finishing a master's degree in the US, which I was very lucky to be able to do, and also very lucky that I managed to get out just before everything properly went bad. And I only had to do a month and a half of remote learning via Zoom and such. These days I'm kind of see myself or my future as a composer and a band leader, and I'm trying to write music that blurs the lines between popular music and popular music influences of various strands and art music, trying to find ways to bridge those gaps in interesting ways, and also to just in general create music that is as unclassifiable as possible. That's kind of what I'm interested in these days. It's very interesting to see, I guess, the differences in between cultures in the two institutions, and the different approaches to learning. And I guess over time, and especially now in retrospect that I finished my tenure, I don't know what you'd call that, at both of these places, I can kind of sit back and think about the ways in which both of them were good for me in very different ways. So I think to try and tell this in a linear way, when I first made it to the States, I found myself very, in a way, musically insecure. And what I mean by that is I noticed immediately in the States that as Ben correctly identified, there's a lot more of a regimented approach to musical education over there. and it's much more comprehensive in terms of, I guess, learning history in a particular way, or learning how to play in different styles, a lot of different styles from different time periods. There's a real focus on raw craftsmanship, I felt like, at the music school that I was at, which is the Jacobs School of Music, which is in Indiana. Yeah, and so it almost felt like going to a trade school of sorts, and the opportunities for, I guess, individualized research-led work were much less. Much rarer. And I initially I found it hard to adjust to that, because as a comparison, the ANU, where I did my undergrad, was very much the opposite, where I felt like I came in as a student, bright and, excited, but not necessarily with a huge idea about my musical personality or anything like that. And the process of studying at ANU, to me, more than anything, was about just like learning about what I like, what I don't like, what I like to play, what I don't like to play, what my place is in all of this, developing my voice, and like thinking critically about all of the music that I was listening to and trying to find ways to combine it all into making some kind of musical identity or personality for myself. The further I went along, the more of a reputation I got in the school for being a composer, and that certainly helped a lot as well. I got more opportunities to make weird music there the longer that I spent there, which was very gratifying. When I was composing, so I put out an album while I was studying at ANU, and that came out maybe 2017 or something around then. And a lot of that album was kind of written myself and I at the piano, just 100% my own volition and my own drive. And it was a really exciting project, and I spent a lot of time like thinking about what I was going to do. But even though jazz is very social music, and of course improvisation is about giving other people compositional opportunities in an ensemble, I felt like I was doing that less on that album. So I most recently put out an album as part of a group that I wouldn't say that I lead, but I am a part of, called it's called Crossroads Quintet. And the whole point of this ensemble was that all 5 of us in the group were going to be composers. And so this album that we put out called Intertwined, which came out in May, there's 7 tracks on it, and all 5 of us have at least 1 song on it. I have 2. But the really cool thing about that was that we rehearsed with that band weekly. We did about 1 2-hour rehearsal a week for the entire time that I was in the US. Literally starting from the first week, we were just like fresh and wanted to play with each other. And then we just kept doing it for ages and ages. So all of the music that was on that album and my compositional voice with that group that I developed was no longer a internal process only. It became a dialogue. And I found that to be really exciting. And also a way to increase productivity in that, when you're having a conversation with somebody else, it's much easier to very quickly come up with a lot of ideas and content. And also it's much easier to come up with things and push yourself in a way that you wouldn't be able to do if you were just working by yourself. So I found it to be a very stretching kind of process, and allowed me to experiment with some, I guess, compositional ideas that I couldn't with my first album, just because we didn't have enough rehearsal time to really allow the improvisation flourish in the way that I wanted it to.
Being a jazz bassist, it kind of necessitates you to be not only, like, you can take on the role of the band leader, but you have to at times play the supporting member. Can you talk about the difference between those roles?
Yeah, of course. It's funny to be, I guess, to lead from different areas of the band, and definitely, classically or traditionally speaking, the bass player plays a very foundational support type role in an ensemble. So it's pretty rare and very controlled situations in which I would take any kind of leading role in an ensemble in a musical context. And that definitely does impact a lot of my ability to compose and lead a band. It impacts the way that I guess, relate to other musicians in the circumstances under which I start writing music for other people. One of the, I guess, most important things to me as a composer I found is that initial experience I had with classical piano playing. And just because it gave me a really strong understanding, I guess, of firstly the capabilities of the piano, and almost all of my music is very piano driven. And it also gave me the ability to play something other than my, piano skills are just really important for composers in general. So I could actually sit down and play multiple things at once and work out exactly what I wanted to do. But backtracking on that question again, one of the most interesting things I think about in jazz composition is how the line that you draw between written material that you give to other people in a band and the ways in which you allow them to improvise. Under what circumstances do you allow them to improvise? How do you limit their improvisation in certain ways? And finding ways to have them generate things that contribute to your compositional vision instead of, I guess, them working completely on autopilot. I think one of the things that can sometimes frustrate me when I hear jazz composers is that they underwrite, I guess. And what I mean by that is the written material on the page of the composition is actually not enough to prescribe the improvisation that people in the ensemble are bringing to the table. And I think that if you don't give the band enough information, their improvisations go on autopilot stylistically or aesthetically a lot of the time. So overall, I would say in my compositions, and perhaps going back to my education at ANU and like how I wrote a lot and spent a lot of time in isolation working on what I was doing, I tend to almost overwrite my compositions for other people. So almost all of my piano parts these days for my compositions are written out in full. So it's not just like a typical jazz lead sheet where you would see like a single stave and a melody line and a chord progression over the top. I'll often write out voicings specifically for I'll write a full piano stuff like and it'll look like classical composition until like a solo section or something. I'll start adding some slashes. But even then, I try and experiment with finding different ways to limit what they're doing, whether it's giving them a figure in the left hand or the right hand to play while improvising, or telling them that they can only improvise in one mode while another instrument is improvising in a different mode. Having different ways to limit what people are doing. For me, it's really important to get that down on the paper because going back to the original question, as a bass player, I don't really get to do all of that myself as much because I'm really supporting other people doing the things. So I just have to find really elaborate ways to tell people to do what I want. and just trying to work out, navigate the relationship between improvisation and composition, which are of course the same thing, but I think being able to create a unified and focused aesthetic experience while allowing place for improvisation, and finding different ways to limit that improvisation is like one of my chief concerns these days. I think it's really important that if you are a composer, you listen to like all types of music. I really mean all types of music. Like, I reckon if I was I was going to be like some hard-edged like music teacher or a lecturer at a university, I would like make people like list all of the types of music that they had they'd never listened to, or aesthetically just couldn't understand or were uncomfortable with, and then just force them to listen to it until they found something in it they liked. Some of my most gratifying experiences as a listener have been doing that. Like, I spent like, I don't know, like I had a cringe metal phase like when I was a teenager, like every good white boy, but after I escaped that, like Metallica and whatever else that's not very good phase, that we won't talk about that, but I couldn't find any metal that I enjoyed until I forced myself to like listen to metal until I enjoyed it, essentially. And then I found that to be really exciting. And now these days, like there's definitely things that I've written that take inspiration from that. But yeah, so I mean, more broadly, going back to, I guess, what I said in the introduction, I think writing music, like there's certainly plenty of more excavation that can be done in music within specific genres. But I think as a listener, I find it most exciting when I hear something and I don't know exactly what is being drawn upon stylistically, or there's a marriage of two different aesthetics or sound worlds that I didn't think would fit together, or I hadn't even considered fitting together before. And that kind of unpredictability is most exciting for me. I find that, if I listen to an album, I'm like, oh, this is just like lo-fi hip-hop beats to study to. Then as soon as I know that it's just lo-fi hip-hop beats to study to, I'm not very interested in it anymore because I already know what it is. But if I listen to something and I'm like, well, this is like combining all of these things, or I don't even know what inspiration the composer is drawing from, and there's an element of unpredictability or playfulness, but also, I guess, a lot of aesthetic exploration. That's what is interesting to me. So when it comes to my composition, I almost, I do draw on jazz influences, of course, but mostly from a craftsmanship perspective. And I definitely go into different compositions thinking like, this time I'm going to take from One O Tricks Point Never, or like this time I'm going to take from like Death Heaven and Liturgy and like the experimental black metal scene, or like all of these different things. Like that to me is very exciting, and trying to weave them all into one thing where I can maybe in the combination of those things I'll be able to find myself. it often feels like harmonically almost everything that could be said has been said. So when it comes to my writing of harmony, I don't think I have developed like I can't really think of much music like past the early 20th century that has really pushed stuff harmonically. Besides, maybe if you were going to start going into microtonalism and spectral harmony and stuff like that, which admittedly I haven't. But I think so. That's one of the reasons why it becomes an attractive to investigate rhythmic complexity as certainly something that has been explored in lots of music over many hundreds of years, especially in non-Western cultures. But it feels like something where there's a little bit more scope for finding an individual voice right now, I think. But also because jazz is groove music of certain sorts, and a lot of the feeling that you get from different grooves is central to how jazz functions. I think finding a new groove is an exciting idea to, I guess, alter the feeling that you get from music. I don't know. And also, I am just like, I'm not a mathematics person by any means, but just like hearing a really fast odd time signature to me is just such an intellectually stimulating, exciting exercise that like I just chase that feeling every now and then. Like I don't want to do it all the time because I also think that complexity for complexity's sake is a crutch and a dangerous thing to be, I guess, exist too much in the realm of. But I like the feeling and the emotion that an odd time signature can give. It was very easy for me to develop and indulge myself in finding my voice in the avant-garde at ANU, and then going to the US and meeting a lot of people that were like, I remember this one time I went to a composition students like graduate recital at IU, and everyone was like, oh, Brendan, you're gonna love this. This shit's so weird. You're gonna love how weird it is. And like everyone was like, yeah, because he's gonna break all of the rules, this guy. And I was like, all right, I'm looking forward to this. Turn up to this recital, and the first thing that happened was somebody, like a stagehand, came out and put a jar of mayonnaise on a stool, left for 2 minutes, and then 2 minutes later came back on the stage, picked up the mayonnaise, and bowed. And it was amazing. Like the students like reacted in a way that was so different to hear. Like they were like, oh my God, this is the next thing. Like this is fucking incredible. He broke all of the rules. This is so new, like so fresh. And this like came off like my time at ANU where Ben Harb and I like cut a salad in front of a stage and we're just like chilling like it was a normal, thing. And of course it is a very avant-garde thing, but I guess I had plenty of experience and knowledge gained over some time spending in that stuff. And so I was like, I kind of found that composition to be a little bit of a waste of time, honestly. And not because it was too weird, but just because the idea had been done before. A lot of extended techniques give a sort of feeling that a normal note could never do. And so, yeah, actually, that has been something that I'm still in the process of trying to do, is like think about ways that I can do all of those things or find those extended technique sounds, and actually like how would I play, like what kind of extended techniques can I use over a jazz solo over changes, for example. Just yeah, to quickly divert for a second, there's a trumpet player called Ambrose Akinmusiri, which I'm probably butchering the last name of, and to Ambrose I am sorry. But that's he's been like a hugely influential player and composer to me, especially over the last couple of years, and for that reason in particular, in that he's found a bunch of ways to incorporate extended techniques into his trumpet improvisations that are like over changes or like over harmony. And yeah, so I find that super interesting. Yeah, it's really interesting because I find that there's that, you know, of course I said that earlier that improvisation is just composition but faster. But I often like I have to put on different hats as a composer and a performer, as you say. And like so I'll write a piece of music that includes like a bass solo or something like that. But when I write it, I'm not thinking about what I'll be doing as a performer when I play it. I just write bass solo or whatever. You know, I'm thinking from a purely I guess my composer persona. And then like after I finish the composition and I bring it to a band or a rehearsal room and I start thinking, then I've got to start thinking about composing from an improvisation perspective. And so it'll be like a completely different thing. Like once I know I'm like taking a bass solo for this section of a piece and I'm bridging this section and this section, then I've got to compose as a performer in a completely different way than what I was doing earlier. Like even though I wrote the entire song, there's new challenges that I have to face before I can perform it the way that I want to, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I guess then each time you're giving yourself a bit of space to kind of develop the piece as well.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, and that's one of the things that, yeah, going, you know, there's like different elements of a jazz composition or any type of composition that involves improvisation. There's elements that are, of course, limited or set in different ways, and there's bits that aren't. And finding, you know, as a performer, getting involved in trying to find different ways to conceptualize the bits that aren't set is really interesting. And it's composition that everybody has to deal with. You know, if I work as a sideman and somebody brings me a composition to play on, then I have to compose in that way because the bass line isn't written out in full or what have you.
The recorded material isn't the set in stone material anymore. It's this kind of transient thing, and because the nature of improvisation is this, like, you know, it's here and then it's gone. You do it once on a recording and that's it forever, and you're trying to emulate that every time you get up and do it live. No, you're actually able to develop the piece in like all these different ways when you're just performing it.
Yeah. That's like something that, yeah, it's so weird for like when you listen to an improvised piece and then you record it and then you put it on an album, like then it's the same every time. And that's like exactly not what it's like to perform or go see that improvised music live. You know what I mean? Because like if you get to know, like if you listen to a piece of improvised music that's been recorded again and again and again, you get to know it as if everything has been set. Like it then becomes impossible to know where the limits are and where the freedoms are. Which is, I think it can be kind of frustrating because like you can wear out a piece of improvised music a lot. Like if I listen to the same VJ Iyer or Bad Plus thing too many times, then I know it, and then that kind of reduces the excitement of like knowing what's going to happen next in an improvised section. Not, or I guess the excitement of not knowing what happens next. But at the same time, it's really cool because then it gives the composition an additional air of mystery where you can like listen to something and you'd be like, I have no idea what's going on. Like, was this improvised or was this composed, or what did the composer tell the like performer to do, or what did the rehearsal process look like? And there's a lot of albums that I've listened to that certainly bring up those questions in myself, and that curiosity I find really rewarding, or at least interesting to think about. Tyshawn Sorey is somebody I think about with that particular, I guess, mysteriousness as to his compositional process, or Henry Threadgill as well. Both of them super exciting to listen to. Yeah, when it comes to my actual composition, I guess, yeah, it's hard. I don't know how exactly I could like tie this all into a neat bow and be like, yes, I like music that sounds like this, and it comes up in my music like this. It's really a case by case basis, you know. Like sometimes I write something and I'm like, oh, like I want this to be a blast beat, and then I tell my drummer to play a blast beat. Or like, you know, sometimes I tell my rhythm section that I want them to like glitch out like it was an Aphex Twin like type situation or whatever. It can be something as simple as that, or yeah, you know, and things also like I go through different phases in my music listening, but as of late, I've been really, let's see, some things that I've been listening to lately that I've been really enamored by. I recently, or just yesterday, or a couple of days ago now, I went and got Laughing Stock by Talk Talk on vinyl, and I love that album. I love it a lot. Just because I I think even though it's a contemporary album, and you know most people put it in the post rock genre, like whatever the post rock means. So, it's sounds very improvised to me, and the recording process of that is they had like 50 people in a room, and each of those 50 people, when they were brought in, like had very little understanding of what the composition, what they were playing for, or the wider context of their playing, and then everything was fit together in a very long, arduous editing process afterwards. So the album has this quality where it's like it sounds improvised, but it's also very controlled. So yeah, I really like that about it. Yeah, to me, it kind of sounds like it sounds so jazz. That album to me, so jazz. I've been listening to. There's this album called Field of Reeds by These New Puritans that I've absolutely fallen in love with. And it's also that one's very tightly composed. But what I really like about it is that it involves really like advanced or like atypical harmonic ideas and rhythmic ideas and structural ideas for the compositional idiom that is involved, which is like essentially just like modern indie, like Radiohead-esque kind of music. But it's taken the craftsmanship and the complexity of it on a raw musical level is just taken to a different level where it's like, I think the line between art music and popular music is very thoroughly blurred. So yeah, I'm really into that. Yeah, should just rattle off a few more. Like, I really like Black MIDI. I've been listening to this black metal band from New York called Imperial Triumphant. They're really awesome, and I mentioned them before, but I really, really love One O Tricks Point Never. I wrote a big band chart recently that's basically just a tribute to One O Tricks Point Never. I just love that stuff.
Yeah. How did you? I guess that's an interesting thing to pick up on. Is that One O Tricks is just like, it's just samples, it's just synthesis, it's just like this really kind of grating. It can go between like being really pretty stuff, or it can go like being like harsh noise. It's like, how do you think you incorporate that? Because if you're not dealing with synthesis or samples or anything like that, how are you kind of I guess scoring that out?
That's a great question. I could play this to you at some point. I don't know if actual listening to work of people is part of this, but anyway, so this big band chart that I wrote, that's supposed to be basically just a shrine to One O Tricks Point Never. Of course there isn't, besides like I told there's a guitar solo in the middle of it, and I told them to bring like every effects pedal that they possibly could and experiment as much as they could. Besides that, like there really isn't much scope for me to really, I don't know, bring in sampled material or like any of the luxuries of, I guess, spending a lot of time on a piece of music in Ableton and working in like a post, I don't know what you call that. Just the compositional process of One O Tricks Point Never is like incredibly different than a big band. One of those things and one of the things I love about it, as you say, is like it goes from like this something like really pretty or to something that's really harsh and gross, and it's very unpredictable, and it moves between these things in a very scattershot way. And that's definitely something that I wanted to incorporate into this thing that I was writing. So basically, what I ended up doing was just like trying to be as disruptive as possible to my own structures that I was setting up. So like if there was a ballad section or like a quiet, slow section to the song, I would want to interrupt that section with a new idea before that section of the piece had like fully come to a close, if that makes sense. And the same thing with like there's a soli section, which is basic like a composed like solo essentially for the saxophone section. Is this like big building thing, and it starts with a saxophone solo and it builds into this huge ensemble thing, and it's supposed to be really loud, but just before the cadence happens, I swap it into half time and it becomes like a really slow ballad thing. So just like the idea of, I guess, playing with structure and expectations that are set up by structure in that way was how that manifested. Well, I mean, okay, so I've definitely like messed around with Ableton, and not like an exhaustive amount at all, but like I at least half know my way around the program, and have made a couple of beats myself. But one thing that I've been thinking about a lot is like trying to find a way to actually incorporate that into the jazz, or my standard compositional practice, how that would work. And I think that that's a realm that's of a lot of interest, or I feel like there's a lot of room for experimentation in that hasn't really been done as much in the new jazz thing as as other things have been, like odd time signatures, for example. Everyone and their mums is playing odd time signatures. So yeah, I haven't recorded it, but there's one thing I wrote where I had a bunch of people. I like wrote a melody and a chord progression and a bunch of stuff, and recorded band members playing it, and then reversed all of it and then incorporated the samples of the reversed composition into the final composition, if that makes sense. So that's my clock again. We'll wait for 2 seconds here. Yeah, so it would be like a piano play. My pianist would be playing accompanied by themselves, played reverse, or like that kind of idea. So I was messing around with that for a little bit, but I never really like fully saw that through, and I should definitely do that. I actually a few days ago got a grant from ACT Arts, which I'm very excited about. And one of the things I want to do with whatever I make for that is to have a core ensemble recorded in a typical jazz way, everything live in a room, and then take those stems and I like manipulate them and also record additional instrumentation on top of it later on, which is something that doesn't happen a lot in jazz music, but I think would also, as you say, give me a way in to kind of think about sampling or synthesis or any like I guess atypical compositional techniques when it, at least in the realm of improvised jazz music, a way to incorporate that into my standard compositional practice. I really enjoy listening to electronic music almost, just because I spend so much time in the acoustic world that like when I hear like people manipulate texture like One O Tricks Point Never or like Arca or Sophie, anybody else, Ben Harb as well, of course, Soft Hollow. It's exciting and refreshing because I don't necessarily know how they did it, and then that allows me to almost enjoy the musical experience as a musician, as a non-nerd, a little bit. It allows a little bit more mysteriousness into the way in which something was made, which I enjoy.
What you just heard was the track Dormant Vessel by Crossroads Quintet from the album Intertwined. You also heard snippets of the tracks Irrational Faith and Unravel. You can find more information about Brendan's work on our website, cassetteconnection.com. Ben Harb's Brain Trust. You like that?
What does the brain trust think?
Yeah.
Yeah. No, the brain trust was they were really happy with that episode. I think Brendan he's a really great dude. And his music is pretty incredible. And his bass playing is fantastic. I think, like he was talking about in the interview, one of the big takeaways I get from him is his rhythmic ideas, his technicality on the rhythms, finding these weird grooves. I think that's all really interesting. Like he said, you can kind of evoke this, I don't know, like emotions, cool ideas, thoughts, different stuff when
the feeling of it.
Yeah. You just kind of get a new feeling when you throw these time signatures in or these rhythmic ideas in that don't sit with anything you would probably normally listen to unless you only listen to jazz and other groove music. But like I said, I think Brendan is kind of, in my eyes, on the cusp of this like new fusion. That makes sense. I think the more he progresses, the more he kind of gets into broader listening, taking influences from wherever he can. That's kind of the roots of fusion, and expanding on that would be really interesting to see.
Kind of modern jazz fusion.
Yeah, I think it's really cool and really exciting. But that was a great interview. I want to thank Brendan again for being on the show, and thank you for listening.
Bye.
See ya. Cassette Connection is recorded and produced by Ben Harb and Alex Ferrugia. For more information, head to our website, cassetteconnection.com.
You can follow us on Twitter and Instagram at Cassette Connection. And if you would like to be featured or just want to get in touch, our email is contact@cassetteconnection.com.